The UFC has 8 champions across all weight classes, and today I want to use a 1 out of 10 scale to rank every single UFC champion's skills in the UFC. So how good is their boxing out of 10? Their ground game, their kickboxing, and their wrestling. I thought this would be a really fun video to see who is the most skilled champion of them all, and I think that's obvious when you look at their skill sets. But with that out the way, let's get right into it, starting off with Alexandre Pantoja, the flyweight champion of the world. He's 10-0 against the top 10 of his division. He's been wrecking havoc over the division, and he has a really solid skill set. Starting off with his boxing, I would give his boxing a 7 out of 10. You could argue for a 6 because he does wing a lot of punches. He does kind of go in sloppy sometimes. But listen, man, if you're hanging in there with Brandon Moreno and Brandon Royval on the feet, your boxing's got to be solid. So I think a fair take to Alexandre Pantoja would be a 7 out of 10 on his boxing. You know, hey, we're sorry for this man. And he comes in with the big 1-2 down the pipe. Either way, Alexandre Pantoja with a 7 out of 10 in boxing. Kickboxing, I give him also a 7 out of 10. He uses kicks to pressure guys and to set up his takedowns a lot. You'll see him throw out a lot of kicks. And even if you watch his last fight versus Kai Asakura, I think he was very kick heavy, if I remember correctly. And then he eventually got the takedown and got the rear naked choke. But overall, I would say he's got some solid kickboxing in his arsenal. In his wrestling, we're going to give that a 7 out of 10. Alexandre Pantoja is no slouch when it comes to the wrestling. He can get a lot of guys to the ground with his wrestling, and once he gets you to the ground with his wrestling, he's probably going to dominate because his ground game, I would say, is a 9 out of 10. The best part of his entire game is his ground game. Now, he doesn't always get the finish when he gets to the ground. A lot of times he half guard camps, he can't find the submission, or he'll just kind of like just hold position for the rest of the round and dominate, so to speak, guys. So yeah, Alexandre Pantoja, he's a very well-rounded champion. Obviously, if you're a champion, you've got to be somewhat well-rounded. 7 out of 10 boxing, 7 out of 10 kickboxing, 7 out of 10 wrestling, and a 9 out of 10 ground game for an overall rating of a 7.5 out of 10. I think 7.5 out of 10 for a UFC champion is pretty dang good. Also, let me clarify, I'm going to be scaling the scores to division, so like, I'm going to be saying how good is this guy's boxing for the middleweight division, because if I didn't do it that way, then obviously it wouldn't be fair for the upper weight classes because their skills are obviously not going to be as good as the lower weight classes. But with that out of the way, let's get on to the next one. Magomed Ankalaev. Magomed Ankalaev recently defeated Alex Pereira to become the UFC champion, and let's look at his skill set, man. I think his boxing is one of the most promising things about his game. He has really underrated boxing. That's what a lot of people were saying going into the Alex Pereira fight, and it showed, man. In the fight, when he got in the boxing range, he was holding his own, and even he rocked Alex against the cage in the second round with that big right hand. And yeah, a boxing for sure, 8 out of 10. That's probably the strongest part of his entire striking game, but not far behind. I'm going to also have his 8 out of 10 as a kickboxing. Now, if this was Pereira, we'd have 10 out of 10 because he's one of the greatest kickboxers ever. But Magomed Ankalaev, his kickboxing is an 8 out of 10. The push kicks he was throwing against Alex Pereira were very impressive. It was keeping Alex Pereira honest, and man, it looked like it hurt, honestly. Those push kicks look very painful, and he was throwing them often and a lot against Alex Pereira. And just in general, he has a front kick knockout finish in the UFC earlier in his career, if you look. So this guy's kicks are very powerful. Body kicks, leg kicks, just kicks across the board. Magomed Ankalaev is an amazing striker, which is why he was able to contest and hold his own in the striking against one of the greatest strikers in Alex Pereira. His wrestling leaves a lot to be desired, especially after that Alex Pereira fight. I got to give his wrestling a 6 out of 10. I can't rate it above that. I mean, this guy went 0 for 12 on takedowns against a glory kickboxer. And a lot of people were hyping up his wrestling, saying like, dude, Magomed Ankalaev is the best wrestler at light heavyweight, but yet he couldn't take down a glory kickboxer. That is concerning for me. Jan Blachowicz was able to get Alex Pereira down. Israel Adesanya was able to get Alex Pereira down. And I know guys improve throughout their career. Like, obviously, Alex is going to be improving his takedown defense, but let's not pretend like Magomed Ankalaev is dominating everybody in the wrestling. He was able to take down a tired Jan Blachowicz toward the end of their fight in their last 2 rounds and dominate him in the wrestling. And when we're talking about his ground game, that's also a 6 out of 10 for me, because who is Magomed Ankalaev dominating on the ground? He has decent ground and pound, but he doesn't really take guys down and dominate them. He doesn't have any submissions on his record, so his BJJ is lacking. He's been submitted by Paul Craig via a low IQ move. So I would say his wrestling and his ground game is definitely lacking, and I think that is probably the most overrated part of his game. I think he's way better striker than he is on the ground and in the wrestling whatsoever. So overall, we give Magomed Ankalaev a 7 out of 10. A little bit under Alexandre Pantoja. Really skilled champion. Obviously, you have to be really skilled to go on a 13-fight unbeaten streak in the light heavyweight division. So he's reigning supreme at the top of that division right now, and really overall solid skills. Moving on to the featherweight division, Alexander Volkanovski recently claimed his belt back against Diego Lopez. One of the greatest comeback wins or one of the greatest wins of a fighter over the age of 35 we've ever seen, because he's the first fighter in UFC history to win a belt in the lower weight classes past the age of 35. And he did it because he's one of the most skilled fighters we've ever seen. In the boxing realm, I mean, Alexander Volkanovski is a 9 out of 10. Just look, I can't put him a 10 out of 10 because that would be like Ilya level of boxing. He's not there, but he's 9 out of 10. Look what he did to Max in their third fight. That was a boxing masterclass. He boxed the head off of Max, destroyed Max's face, left him in a pool of his own blood over 5 rounds. He contested and outboxed Islam Makhachev in a lot of moments in their fight. He outboxed Diego Lopez. His kickboxing is right there too. Kickboxing also a 9 out of 10. Volk has some of the best kickboxing in the lower weight classes we've ever seen. I don't know. I couldn't put it a 10 out of 10. I don't know why I was hesitant to, but let me know if you guys disagree. Should I have given his kickboxing a 10 out of 10? I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10 because, you know, you could chop at his legs. You know, you can get Volk with some kicks. He's not the strongest kick. No, I'm joking. Volk has some of the best kickboxing out of any featherweight we've ever seen, but I'm still going to cut it off at a 9 out of 10. I feel like 10 out of 10 would be glazing a little bit. His wrestling, I'm going to give an 8 out of 10. Alexander Volkanovski obviously has really good offensive and defensive wrestling. This guy's extremely hard to take down, and he can get takedowns. Look what he did to Yair Rodriguez. I think he got Diego Lopez down a couple times. Who else did he take down? He took down Max Holloway in their second fight to secure the win in some moments. He took down Islam Makhachev in their fight in the 5th round. So Volkanovski has really great offensive and defensive wrestling. You could argue for a 9 out of 10, but I'm going to give him an 8 out of 10. I don't want to glaze too hard. And his ground game, also an 8 out of 10. He definitely lacks in the offensive BJJ department. You're not really going to see Volkanovski submitting guys or taking the back that often, but he has very good top control. He has good top pressure. He has great ground and pound shown against Brian Ortega and against Yair Rodriguez. If he gets you on the ground and he's on top, he will rain down vicious ground and pound. So just off of that, I will give Volk's ground game an 8 out of 10. So we got 9 out of 10 boxing, 9 out of 10 kickboxing, 8 out of 10 wrestling, 8 out of 10 ground game, for an overall of 8.5 out of 10. Obviously, Volk's going to be very high. He's one of the greatest fighters we've ever seen across the history of the sport, and he's one of the most skilled fighters we've ever seen across the history of the sport. So Volkanovski has definitely earned that 8.5 out of 10, in my opinion. Moving on to Belal Muhammad. Hands like Canelo. Some of the best boxing we've ever seen in the history of the sport. All jokes aside, I'm going to give Belal Muhammad's boxing a 7 out of 10. His forward pressure along with his boxing and the way he's able to throw out his jab and just pressure guys with forward pressure using his boxing. That sounded like a whole bunch of nothing I just said. But his boxing is obviously decent. It's pretty good. It can be a little bit sloppy sometimes. You've seen his fight versus Sean Brady. Although he got the finish, he left his chin straight up in the air on a silver platter. And if Sean Brady had any striking technique, he probably would have caught Belal. But nonetheless, Belal's boxing does look improved. In his fight against Leon Edwards, it looked like he had upped his game in terms of the boxing. So I'm going to give him a 7 out of 10. Kickboxing, we're going to give him a 6.5 out of 10. He has really good body kicks, but a little bit sloppy in the kickboxing. Not the best kickboxer in the world. It's not like Belal spinning will kick KOing people or you know, throwing mean leg kicks all fight and just chewing up guys' legs and beating them up with the boxing. He has really good body kicks, but outside of that, his kickboxing leaves a lot to be desired. His wrestling is definitely the best part of his game. I give his wrestling an 8 out of 10. I'm not going to say 9 out of 10 or 10 out of 10 because, you know, it's good wrestling, but it's not like the most dominant wrestling you've ever seen. If you have solid takedown defense like a Jeff Neal and like a Vicente Luque back in the day in the first fight, and even like who else did he fight? I mean, Leon Edwards was even able to defend takedowns in moments against Belal. Not the best takedown defense, but Sean Brady took down Leon Edwards way easier than Belal Muhammad did throughout their fight. So yeah, Belal Muhammad, wrestling, definitely a strong wrestling game. I still think it's an 8 out of 10. 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10 is too generous in my opinion. And his ground game, a 7.5 out of 10. Kind of like Alexander Volkanovski, he has good top pressure, not the best ground and pound because he's not very powerful. Also, not really much of submissions. Like he can take your back, shown against a Leon Edwards, but even if he takes your back, you're probably not going to get submitted. So for me, Belal Muhammad has a 7.5 ground game. I can't even tell you the last time this guy's submitted someone, but he will dominate you positionally on the ground. So that deserves some respect for a 7.5 for an overall of 7.25 out of 10. Solid. Like Belal's like he's a solid champion. He's got some solid skills, but Belal is obviously not the most impressive champion in the world. He's not really a talented guy. He's one of those guys that's an extremely hard worker with great cardio, and mix that with all of his like pretty, I'd say, above average skills makes him a champion fighter. So 7.25 out of 10 for Belal Muhammad. Moving on to Merab Dvalishvili. Merab Dvalishvili, this is where it gets interesting, because when we're talking about Merab in the striking, oh boy, I'm just going to get right into it. Boxing and kickboxing, 5 out of 10 and 4 out of 10. Merab has the worst striking of all the champions. That's no secret. He just does. He's not a great striker. He's actually a pretty bad striker. And yeah, man, Merab, his striking is very disappointing. It's And you know, a lot of people are going to say, well, dude, you say your striking's bad, but he outstruck Sean O'Malley, outstruck Umar. But it's like, okay, he's not outstriking these guys because he's better strikers. He's outstriking these guys because they're scared of getting taken down over and over and over again and mauled by his cardio. His cardio is what carries him. It's not his striking. Boxing, 5 out of 10. Kickboxing, 4 out of 10. I mean, what is Merab doing in the kickboxing realm? Absolutely nothing. In the boxing realm, I mean, he's just kind of flinging punches forward like a tard and looking to spam takedowns over and over. His wrestling is definitely an 8 out of 10. I'm not going to give it a 9 or 10 out of 10 because he's not very good at controlling guys on the ground. He's more so good at getting the takedown. The guy gets up, get the takedown. The guy gets up. So I'm not going to say Merab's the most dominant wrestler we've ever seen. His skills are heavily carried by his cardio. If Merab had average cardio, he would not be as effective as a wrestler as he is. I know that's a stupid take. If I had rules, I'd be a bite type argument, but you get what I'm saying. Like, his cardio carries heavily. The fact that this guy has inhuman-like cardio allows him to just shoot takedowns over and over, shooting upwards of 30 to 50 takedowns in a lot of his fights. And his ground game for me is a 7 out of 10. He has a good ground and pound. If he gets guys on the ground, he can beat you up, as shown in the Marlon Moraes fight and even shown in moments in the Umar fight. He can do some decent damage on the ground. Even the Petr Yan fight, Merab will throw some ground and pound. Not the most powerful shots in the world. And also, he's extremely hard to submit and hold down himself. Nobody's submitting Merab and nobody's holding him down on the ground. So I got to give his ground game and his wrestling a 7 and an 8 out of 10 for an overall of 6 out of 10. Merab, in terms of skill, is probably the worst champion in the UFC. Like I said, his cardio carries heavily. He's not really skilled. He's more so a freak of nature in terms of his cardio. Maybe that sounds like I'm hating, but that's my opinion, boys. Moving on to the middleweight division, Dricus Du Plessis. Dricus Du Plessis, he's known as Mr. Looney Tunes. He's known as going in there and goofballing it up, as a lot of people say. He doesn't look like he has the most skills in the world, but for a middleweight, his boxing's not the worst. You know, Dricus, I'm going to give him a 7 out of 10 in the boxing. And in the kickboxing, I'm going to give him a 7.5 out of 10. He kind of just throws flimsy punches going forward with his mouth open, his tongue out like an absolute tard, but it works for him, man. And shown in his last fight, I think his kickboxing improved a lot versus Sean Strickland. He was very smart to go out there and kick the boxer. He threw so many kicks against Sean Strickland in the rematch. And I think he has an underrated kicking game. And overall, Dricus Du Plessis is a really amazing kickboxer and boxer. And one of the I think he's one of the most underrated strikers at 185, because people always think about the Israel Adesanyas, the Alex Pereiras, the Sean Stricklands, the Robert Whitakers, but nobody thought to talk about Dricus Du Plessis striking. This guy has some of the most underrated striking, because people forget, man, Dricus Du Plessis actually came up as a grappler. So people need to start putting some respect on his striking. Who's the last person to outstrike Dricus Du Plessis? And even if they did, they probably got finished later on in the fight. So maybe it was Sean Strickland in the first fight, but that didn't matter because he dominated Sean Strickland in the rematch. And his wrestling, I would give a 6 out of 10. Not the strongest wrestling, especially defensively. Correct me if I'm wrong, but this guy kind of got ragdolled in the wrestling by Derek Brunson and even got taken down temporarily by Darren Till at one point in their fight. Not the strongest wrestler. I think Robert Whitaker also took him down. I don't think Sean Strickland took him down, but either way, Dricus' wrestling is definitely one of the weaker points of his game. Offensively, he's not the strongest wrestler, and defensively, it leaves a lot to be desired. I think if a guy like Khamzat were to go in there and try to take Dricus down, he would have a lot of success very easily, actually. I don't think Khamzat would have much trouble taking Dricus down. Now, submitting him, that's another ball game, but I'll give his wrestling a 6 out of 10. And for his ground game, we'll give him a 7.5 out of 10. People forget, man, he came up as a grappler. He actually submitted Darren Till. The only guy to submit Darren Till at middleweight, dude. No, I'm kidding. I think Derek Brunson did it as well. But Dricus Du Plessis has an underrated ground game. He's the only guy in the UFC to submit Israel Adesanya, which just goes to show you how good his BJJ is. And he has a bunch of submissions on his record before he came to the UFC. So it seems like he's transitioned to more of a striker in the latter half of his career as he's become champion and become more well-rounded. But Dricus has a nasty ground game. He has some nasty submissions. So I think, and I don't see anybody in the UFC submitting him ever. So maybe Hamzat. Actually, outside of Hamza, I don't see anybody submitting him. So, yeah, Dricus Du Plessis, Mr. Looney Tunes himself, overall for the middleweight champion, I'm going to give him a 7 out of 10. Not the most skilled guy in the world, obviously, especially his style doesn't look very pretty. So I can't rate him above a 7 out of 10 just because how goofy and how, like his style works, but technically speaking, he doesn't have the best skills. But overall, obviously, he's good enough to become champion, and he has underrated cardio, I would say. Next up, we got Islam Makhachev. And, you know, in the boxing, Islam's decent. He was able to contest with Dustin Poirier in the boxing. So I'm going to give him a solid 7 out of 10. You know what I'm saying? Islam's got some decent boxing. But if he engages in the boxing, he can tend to have some trouble, which is shown on why he got cut versus Dustin Poirier. And he got kind of pieced up in the boxing against Alexandre Volkanovski. But his kickboxing is better than his boxing. I think it's an 8 out of 10. Listen, man, you don't head kick KO Volkanovski, even on short notice, unless you're a great kickboxer like Islam Makhachev. This guy uses his kicks to keep you at distance and even to set up his takedowns. He has solid body kicks, solid leg kicks, and I think Islam's kickboxing game is one of the best parts of his game, and he's developed as one of the best strikers we've ever seen in the UFC. His wrestling, I'm glazing all day long. Islam has 10 out of 10 wrestling. Listen, I don't care if he struggled to take down Dustin Poirier. At the end of the day, he got him down in the 5th round and got the submission. Whenever he was gassed out, he was able to get a sick takedown. He took down Moicano with ease and submitted him. And you know what? I'm doing even more glazing. Ground game's also a 10 out of 10. This guy submitted more black belts than any other UFC fighter in history. This guy's submitting all the black belts. He's submitting Moicano. He's submitting the submission king and Charles Oliveira. Submitting Drew Dober and Dan Hooker. Who else does that to Drew Dober and Dan Hooker on the ground? Nobody. So, yes, I'm glazing. Islam has a 10 out of 10 wrestling game and a 10 out of 10 ground game, which is why he's finished his last 8 of 9 opponents. And I think there's an argument for this guy to be the most skilled fighter we've ever seen in the history of the UFC. And overall, he's an 8.75 out of 10, which would rank him as the most skilled fighter in the UFC currently, which is why he's a pound-for-pound #1 fighter in the world, and which is why he's, like I said, he's been able to finish his last 8 opponents. He's finished his last 9 fights. He's finished the last 8 opponents he's faced, which is quite crazy when you think about it. What other champion is finishing that many fights? None of them. Merab's not finishing anybody. Belal Muhammad's not finishing anybody. I mean, Pantoja's finishing guys outside the UFC. You know what I'm saying? He's fighting to close split decisions. No, Islam is destroying everybody. He's either taking you down or he's knocking you out on the feet if he's not submitting you. So, yes, Islam, I'm glazing a little bit, but an 8.75 I feel like is fair for Islam. And last, and also least, I would say, is Jon Jones. Jon Jones, one of the most skilled fighters we've ever seen across the board, is the current heavyweight champion. Probably the most disputed champion in history. But in terms of the boxing, I would say that's Jon Jones's weakest part of his game, and it always has been. If you watch the Dominic Reyes fight, that's how Dominic Reyes was able to beat Jon Jones, in my opinion, because I think he did win the fight. He got into boxing range, and he was able to piece up Jon Jones in boxing range, and Jon Jones was struggling on keeping Dominic Reyes on the outside, keeping him at distance, and Dominic Reyes was able to get in close and kind of expose the boxing of Jon Jones. Same thing with Daniel Cormier in their second fight when he was having success. Same thing with Alexander Gustafsson in their first fight when he was having success. Anybody who's had really good success in the striking against Jon Jones, it's whenever they got into boxing range. So obviously, I think Jon Jones is boxing. As of today, is a 6 out of 10. I think even old man Stipe was able to catch him with the uppercut in boxing range. So definitely not a great boxer, but in terms of kickboxing, give him a 9 out of 10. Jon Jones, especially not for being like a glory kickboxing champion like Alex Pereira, has some of the best kickboxing in the upper weight classes we've ever seen. He's definitely up there with the likes of Cyril Gane in the kickboxing up at the heavyweight class. I don't know if he's on that level, which is probably why he chose to take down Cyril Gane instead of kickbox with him. But Jon Jones's kickboxing is some of the best you've ever seen. You know, oblique kicks and eye pokes and holding his hand forward in front of your face. Just an annoying fighter to fight in the kickboxing range. His wrestling, I'm going to give a 10 out of 10. A little bit of glazing, but listen, this guy took down Daniel Cormier, who's an Olympian. He took down Cyril Gane, dominated him with ease. He's taken down most of his opponents, to be honest, and dominated him. He took down and beat up Anthony Smith a whole bunch of times. I think he took down Thiago Santos. He took down Dominic Reyes towards the end of their fight, and that's how he was able to win the latter rounds. Jon Jones has some of the best wrestling, if not the best wrestling we've ever seen in the heavier weight classes across all of the UFC ever. And I think his ground game is also going to be up there at a 9 out of 10. The reason I didn't give it a 10 out of 10, I don't know. I was hesitant. I do feel like whenever he gets guys down, he's not always going to find a submission, but he does have nasty ground and pound. Jon Jones has very vicious ground and pound. What he lacks in knockout ability, he makes up for in ground and pound. And I think you could argue for a 10 out of 10, but you guys know I'm not a huge fan of Jon Jones. So just for me being a little bit of a hater, I'm going to keep his ground game at a 9 out of 10 instead of a 10 out of 10 for an overall of 8.5 out of 10. So Jon Jones and Islam Makhachev tie at an 8.5 out of 10 for the two most skilled champions in the UFC. And I think that's quite accurate. Jon Jones and Islam Makhachev are the two most skilled champions in the UFC, with Merab coming in with the least amount of skills because his cardio heavily carries him. So that's the video, guys. I wanted to take 4 of the skills of every single UFC champion, rate them on a scale of 1 out of 10, and give them an overall score to see who is the best UFC champion in terms of the skills. Let me know if you guys disagree or agree with these ratings in the comments. And as always, I appreciate you guys watching. If you enjoyed the video, drop a like, leave a comment. Thank you guys. Peace.